My son laughed with his friends, saying, "He's only here for free food," while passing my plate, aside, but when the owner brought out the first dollar on the wall, it had my name. His laugh vanished. If you're hearing this, tell me where you are watching from. Your city. Your street. Because betrayal sounds different in every accent, but it lands the same way in a father's chest. Tonight mine landed on a plate that wasn't even allowed to touch me. My son, head thrown back, laughed with his friends at the long table. There were 3 of them, all loud in the way young men get when they think they own the room. He waved to the waiter and nudged my dish away with the back of his knuckles like it carried a small disease. "He's only here for free food," he said, and his friends repeated the line as if it were a joke they had rehearsed. Plates clinked, glasses chimed, the restaurant was warm with pepper and char, with voices rolling over each other. I sat there and felt the room tilt, not because I was old, but because the laugh I once taught him, the laugh that came out of the boy who used to jump into my arms, had turned into something sharper, something that cut. I didn't show it. I kept my hands still, flat on the table. I nodded when the waiter, a thin, nervous man with a kind face, looked at me for instructions. "It's fine," I said in a level voice that didn't ask for permission. "Serve them first." My son laughed again, and this time he made sure I saw his teeth. He made sure his friends saw my face. "Relax, Dad," he said, with that public smile children wear when they want the world to know they have grown taller than you. "You can sit. Watching is free." Someone at the bar snorted. There are always people who put their ears into your life when the sound gets bitter enough. I could have left. I could have taken my coat and the ache in my throat and walked out into the night. But I didn't. I turned my head, slowly, and let my eyes drift to the wall behind the counter, where the frames are. Every restaurant stacks its history in those thin borders. Photos of the first day, a newspaper clip, a diploma no one reads, and, in this place, a small square frame with a green tinge bill in it. The first dollar, greasy light painted the glass. Dust made a faint halo around the wooden edge. I watched it the way a man watches a shoreline he swam from a long time ago. And while my son talked, I thought about that frame and about the hand that wrote the name on its face in the careful ink of a person who knew nothing lasts unless you mark it. "Are you hungry, old man?" one of his friends asked. He wore a silver watch too big for his wrist. He had the swagger of someone who has never paid for the leak in a roof. "We can order you some bread, on the house." They laughed, all 4 of them now, my son included. The laugh hit me and then passed. I let it go through like a cold wind. "Eat," I said softly. "You'll need the strength." He blinked at that, confused, as if the words were a pebble that had somehow cracked his window. His friend nudged him. "What's he going to do? Pray at us?" More laughter. The waiter set down steaks that hissed and released a cloud that smelled like good cattle and butter. My son raised his glass. He didn't look at me. "To beginnings," he said. And finally I smiled, a small, quiet crescent that nobody at the table understood. "Yes," I said, "to beginnings. Beginnings are never clean." I learned that the year my wife and I stood in front of a shuttered storefront and pretended we could see a restaurant where there was only a cracked floor, a broken counter, and a ceiling that sagged like a tired back. She wore a blue scarf in the heat because the scarf was from her mother, and she believed faith had to be worn, not just felt. I believed in numbers and screws and waking up earlier than everyone else. Together, we believed in the simple math of sweat plus time. Every night after my shift at the workshop, I would meet her there. We would sweep the dust into corners and then argue about where the light should be, what color the chairs should feel like, and whether there should be a plant in the window. She always wanted green. "People eat better when they see something alive," she'd say, tying her hair with her teeth, smiling that stubborn smile. I would tell her plants die when you forget them. "Then we don't forget," she'd answer. "We remember." We remembered everything that year. We remembered how to borrow and pay back without losing our names. We remembered which neighbor had tools and which one had gossip. We remembered to kiss in the aisle of the paint store because we couldn't afford the rich color, so we made our own. We remembered to cook in pots that were too thin and stir with spoons that bent. She did the numbers late at night, her head bent over a cheap calculator and papers that slid like cards. I hammered shelves and thought about how a shelf never argues. It either holds or it doesn't. The day we received our license, she cried into my shirt until my shoulder darkened. "It's ours," she said. "It's ours, finally." The keys in my pocket felt like coins in a fountain. We slept on the floor that night, on a blanket that smelled of detergent and fresh daring. The first day we opened, nobody believed we were ready. Not the neighbors, not the cousin who sent his pity through a smile, not even the delivery boy who brought us our bread late because he thought we would be empty anyway. But she stood at the door in her blue scarf and her proud, thin shoes. And she said hello to the morning as if it were a special guest who had come all the way from another city to taste her soup. It was a Tuesday. The sky over the street was the color of things that work. At 11, a man walked in. He looked like the end of a long shift, shirt wrinkled, eyes. It's soft with the kind of tired that doesn't complain because it's used to itself. He ordered a bowl of stew. She served it with extra bread and refused to take the coin he tried to put in her hand. "Next time," she said, "first bowl is on the house." He smiled, embarrassed, then stubborn, and put $1 on the counter. "No," he said, "first bowls should be paid for." He left, and we both stood there staring at the bill as if it were a bird that had flown into our window and fallen asleep. "Frame it," she whispered, "before the wind takes it." I wrote my name and the date on the white strip we tore from a receipt. My hand shook. She held my wrist until the letters were steady. We put the $1 in a cheap frame and hung it behind the counter, a small green promise in a room that still smelled a little like paint. "One day," she said, brushing a thumb over the glass, "we'll have so many dollars this one will look like a joke." I kissed her hair and told her jokes are what make the hard bits bearable. We worked through winters that ate the tips of our fingers and summers that boiled the kitchen into a cauldron. We worked through my blisters and her cough that came on gentle and never left entirely. We worked through bills that didn't care that we were good people. We worked because work is the only prayer some men know how to say. By the time our son could reach the counter, he had already learned how to smile at customers and stack plates without dropping them. He stood on a stool to brush butter on bread. He stole olives and made faces at their taste. When he fell, he never cried where people could see. He saved his tears for the pantry where the spices keep secrets. "He'll be taller than both of us," she would say, hand on his hair, eyes full of tomorrow. "He'll wear a shirt that fits this place, and this place will fit him." I believed her because I had learned that she knew how to see ahead of me. When school projects asked him to draw his family, he drew 3 people behind a counter. He drew bowls that made steam and a door that was always open. She died with quiet hands. That is how I remember it. The doctors were noisy with machines and words, but her hands were quiet. And when I held them, she looked at me as if to say, "Remember." The scarf was folded in a drawer, the blue a little paler from being washed too much. Our son stood at the window at home and watched the street like it might tell him the part he had missed. We buried her on a Monday and opened the restaurant again on Tuesday because grief tastes more like hunger when you sit still with it. I told the staff, "We don't change the soup today. We make it the way she wrote it." I stood where she used to stand and said hello to the morning like it was a special guest brave enough to walk into a room where everything knew her name. People say time makes certain pains smaller. That isn't true. Time makes other things larger. Around them, the restaurant grew. The corners got fat with memories. The regulars brought their children, and then those children brought their dates. And all the while, the little frame behind the counter kept its place, catching the light like a tiny lighthouse. I dusted it on Sundays. Sometimes I caught my son staring at it, reflection layered over his face in the glass. "Why do we keep that ugly thing?" he would ask, laughing because boys laugh when they are afraid of taking something seriously. "Because the first $1 tells the truth about the rest," I'd answer. He would roll his eyes and run to the patio with a tray. When he turned 18, he said he wanted more space, more control, more modern. He talked about menus printed on tablets and music louder than knives. I nodded and let him try some of it. A father must learn which walls can be repainted and which must stay load-bearing. And now, here we were, years after her hands quieted, at his long table with his new friends, his loud watch, his laugh designed to be overheard. The things he wanted were all around us. New lights, new chairs, a logo that looked like it had been designed in a city where the sun forgets to rise. He had fought me for those lights. He had won. He thought that meant he owned the sky under them. He pushed my plate aside as if pushing me into a smaller part of the room. He's only here for free food, he said, and the echo bounced off every memory this place had of him, eating for free because he was a child, because he was ours, because bread tastes better when someone who loves you breaks it. Eat, I told him again, as calmly as if I were asking for salt. Eat. The waiter glanced at me, then at the owner, Kareem, a careful man who knows the balance between respect and business better than most men know their own shoes. Kareem stood behind the counter, wiping clean a glass that wasn't dirty at all. He didn't smile, he didn't interfere. His eyes moved once to the frame with the bill and then back to me. When our eyes met, something passed between us. A small nod to a promise that had been hanging on that wall since a Tuesday years before my son learned to speak in front of people. I lifted my glass and let the water sit on my tongue. I listened to my son explain to his friends how margins work, how branding is everything, how loyalty is a lever. He used the words like kids use borrowed tools, clumsy, loud, too sure of the handle. Dad, he said suddenly, turning to me, as if the thought had just tapped him on the shoulder. You don't have to stay for dessert. We're meeting investors later. Grown-up talk. I looked at him the way you look at a bridge you once built by hand and now see covered in new paint. I enjoy grown-up talk, I said, but I'll let you practice without me. His friends smirked. The watchboy stage whispered, he's going to pray at us after all. My son leaned back, put an arm across the chair, and surveyed the room as if it were a field. Times change, he said to no one in particular. We're moving forward. I let my eyes rest on the frame again. The first dollar cannot move. It can only witness movement. It sees who comes and who goes and who pretends not to see it. I thought about my wife's thumb on the glass, the way she had smoothed the air over it as if protecting a candle from being blown out by a careless door. I thought about the ink of my name on the small strip and the way she had held my hand steady so the letters would not lean into fear. I thought about all the mornings we had said hello to, as if they were special guests, and the way the room had replied with clinks and sighs, and the soft music of forks touching porcelain. I thought about my son's first steps between these tables, how he chose the path between chair legs as if negotiating a future no one yet understood. There are stories people tell themselves to feel tall. Then there are stories the walls remember. The walls don't argue. They wait. Tell me something, son, I said finally, letting the words settle before I let them be heard. He paused, a king who doesn't expect the pebble on his road. What? He asked, amused. Do you remember the first day? I asked. His friends looked at each other. He smirked. I was a kid, he said. I remember boredom. I nodded, as if he had told me a recipe. I remember $1, I said. He followed my gaze. The frame caught a shard of the overhead light and flashed briefly, like the idea of a lighthouse. He laughed one last time, a smaller sound now. That old thing, he said. We should take it down. It's tacky. Kareem's cloth stopped moving against the glass he held. The waiter, passing behind my chair, slowed, then hurried forward as if the air had become sticky. You can take a lot down, I murmured. But some things, if you take them down, the ceiling remembers. He didn't understand, not yet. He returned to his steak as if it had something to say that couldn't wait. I sat back and felt my heart steady itself. There are fights in which you raise your voice. This was not one. This was the kind of fight in which you lift nothing but an eyebrow, and everything heavy lifts itself. I let the room go on. I let the plates sing, and the laughter stumble, and the first course vanish into appetites that had never been hungry enough to be grateful. I let it all happen, because patience is the last tool they teach you, and the only one they can't take from you once you've learned it. If you're still with me, tell me where you are listening from, because I want to know how far a father's quiet can travel. Tonight mine traveled the length of a room to a small frame where $1 waits like a witness. My son thinks this is a story about food. He thinks it's a story about fashion. He doesn't know yet that it's a story about names and how some names don't wash off. He doesn't know yet what happens when the room is asked to remember. He will. Soon enough, he will. I watched my son settle deeper into his chair like a young king who had just discovered the word mine. The steaks bled onto the white plates. The laughter was bigger now, on purpose, so the room would know who was running the night. He waved the waiter closer with 2 fingers and pointed at my glass. Don't refill that, he said. He's just here to watch. The waiter's face tightened, a small storm behind the eyes. but he nodded because he has learned that some orders are not about the thing being ordered. I lifted the glass anyway and let the last inch of water touch my lip. I wanted to see how far the disrespect would travel before it realized it had lost the road. My son tapped the table with a fork to get the attention of the men at the bar, men who have known me for 20 years and were now pretending to be busy with their phones. "We're rebranding," he announced to no one and everyone. "New menu, new concept, old stuff is going." He looked straight at the wall, at the little frame that caught the light, and then back at his friends. "Even that tacky dollar? Can you believe they used to think that mattered?" His friends leaned back with their arms spread, the easy body language of boys who have never paid the electricity bill. The one with the watch pulled out his phone and took a quick video, panning over the crowded tables. "Say it again," he told my son. "Say the part about old stuff." My son grinned into the camera. "Out with it." The room heard it. Rooms hear everything. Kareem heard it, and for the first time that night, he stopped wiping the glass he had been polishing since I sat down. He set it down with more care than a man gives to glass. His eyes moved to the frame, then to me. It was a question and a memory in one look. Do we let this go? Do we remember? The waiter by my shoulder didn't move. He held a tray too still. When work is honest, hands tell the truth first. I put my palms flat on the table so they could see I wasn't shaking. Inside, I counted the screws on the light fixture above us. Counting has always been my way to keep the ocean in its place. "Dad," my son said suddenly, turning the fork into a pointer. "Tell them the story about how you kept cash in jars because you didn't trust banks." His friends smiled like men watching a street show. "He likes old things," he said. "Old ideas, old rules." I smiled back, a thin line. "Jars kept us fed," I said. "Banks did too. We use both." He tilted his head, surprised that I answered without breaking. "It's fine," he told his friends. "He does that. He makes simple things sound heavy. Storytelling." He popped a piece of steak into his mouth and chewed like he was proving a point to the meat itself. "Escalation is a ladder people climb without looking down." He took another step. "Kareem," he called, casual, loud. "We'll need to take that frame down tonight. I'll put something there for the event next week. The investors are coming. We can't have that in the shot." The word "that" landed like the back of a hand. Kareem didn't move. In our place, silence is not emptiness. It is a signal. He looked at me again. I let the moment hang, then nodded as if I were agreeing to the weight of the air. "Kareem," I said softly, "bring me a coffee when you have a minute." He inclined his head, slow, respectful, then walked to the machine as if it were an altar. The hiss of steam filled the space my son had just tried to own. "Why do you always do that?" my son asked. "Do what?" "Talk around things. It's simple. We're moving forward. The old stuff goes. People like new." He tapped the fork on the table again, a nervous little hammering now. "You're the one who taught me to think like a businessman." I took a breath that was more memory than air. "I taught you to think like a builder," I said. "Build, then own what you build, then carry it, and don't drop the people who helped you lift it." He laughed and smoothed the front of his shirt. "Semantics," he said to his friends. "He loves semantics." He spread his arms again. "Look around. This is bigger than his backroom stew days." One of his friends pushed back and stood, stretching, and clapped my son on the shoulder. "You're the man," he said. "Finally." He looked at me with the kind of grin people use when they have already picked sides. "We're going to help him blow this up," he said, meaning make it famous, not destroy it. But he didn't know how words sometimes keep their older meanings. "Investors love fresh blood," he pointed at the frame, "and they hate old stories." I wanted to ask him if he had ever stood under a roof he himself repaired in the rain and felt the dry hold, but there's no point asking a man about a storm he hasn't earned. I watched my son watch the room. He was taking in the numbers like he knew them, counting chairs and adding nights and subtracting cost of goods. He was saying grown-up words, but numbers are like knives. In the wrong hand, they cut the wrong thing. He didn't notice how the older couple at table 5 leaned toward each other when he raised his voice, or the way the newcomer at the bar traced the frame with his eyes while pretending to sip slowly. He didn't see the waiter's rigid elbow or the busboy holding his breath near the kitchen door. He saw profit. He didn't see blood. Kareem set the coffee in front of me with a saucer that did not rattle. Up close, his voice was a whisper meant for two people only. "It's strong," he said. "How you like it?" Then, lower. "Do you want me to say it?" He didn't say what it was. He didn't need to. I shook my head. "Not yet." He nodded once and stepped back, adopting again the careful pace of a man who refuses to be in the way of the wrong moment. My son drummed the fork again and looked between us. "See," he said to his friends, "they do whatever I tell them here." His certainty was a new coat he wanted everyone to compliment. He took another step up his ladder. "I told suppliers to send invoices to me only, by the way," he said. "Streamline, no more paper clutter, everything in my email." He stabbed a piece of potato and flicked it toward his mouth. "And I told the accountant to drop the line item for legacy." What was the word? Legacy goodwill. He smiled at his own cleverness. Legacy goodwill. He had cut the words as if they were fat, not knowing sometimes fat is what keeps the meat from burning. "Did you sign anything?" I asked, calm as a stone. He waved it away. "Digital authorizations. Times change." He glanced at his friends, looking for approval. One nodded. The watchboy said, "About time." I let the coffee rest under my lip again. The bitterness was clean. I remembered the exact weight of the folder in my hall closet, the one with the old signatures in blue and black ink, the one that smelled faintly of the agency where the woman had stapled the documents with the force of someone who knows staples hold lives together. I remembered the ring of keys, 2 silver, 1 brass, and 1 odd one that opens the storage cage in the basement, where we keep chairs no one sits in but can't throw away. I remembered the letter from the bank that starts with, "This is to confirm," and ends with, "Held in the name of," and the names were mine and my wife's, joined by a small and stubborn "and," not an "or." I remembered because I made sure to never forget. My son thought control meant logins. He didn't know how many doors still opened only the old way. He kept climbing. "We're also changing the story," he said. "People want a founder story they can post. We'll say it was a group effort, friends coming together with a dream, community. Sounds better than a family drama from 1,000 years ago." He chewed and shook his head, amused at the idea of people doing hard things without an audience. "And that dollar," he pointed at it with the fork, "that has to go tonight. It ruins the photo wall vibe." His friend laughed into his napkin. "Photo wall vibe," he repeated, loving the sound. I set the cup down and folded my hands again. "Do you know why that dollar is there?" I asked, as if I had never told him. He rolled his eyes. "Yes, Dad. We've all heard the origin myth. You and Mom and the man who paid when he didn't have to. It's cute." He clapped twice like a host cueing new music. "But cute doesn't scale." He looked at Kareem. "You heard me. It comes down." Kareem's face did not change. He was looking at the frame itself, not at the space around it. There are men in this world who understand that some objects are not objects. They are contracts. He is one of them. I could have told my son about the building, about the deed he never asked to see because he thought the walls would keep standing just because he stood in front of them. I could have told him about the land parcel and the zoning letter, and the long, quiet meeting with the city man who liked my soup and stamped the paper, because I had served him the same bowl when his wife left him and he needed to sit somewhere that felt kind. I could have told him about the lease with its dates and its clauses, and the sentence that says who opens and who locks and who gets the last word on what hangs on which wall. I could have put all that on the table like a new course and watched his appetite die. But not yet. There is a right time to salt a dish. He leaned toward me then, lowering his voice as if intimacy could make the insult sweet. "You should go home," he said. "There's no reason to sit here like a sad statue. We'll bring you leftovers." He looked at his friends for the laugh and got it. "You like stew, right?" I kept my voice level and light. "Not tonight," I said. "Tonight I want to see how you finish your meal." He shrugged and sat back and turned his face toward the bar again, already looking for the next place to place his voice. The room watched us the way a theater watches the actors when they pretend not to see the audience. Even the ice in the glasses seemed to hold its breath. I studied the small things because the small things carry the truth when the big ones lie. The busboy's shoes were wet at the toe. He had come in through the alley where the snow melt made a thin river. The woman at table 7 had kept her wedding ring on a chain around her neck. It glinted when she leaned over her pasta to whisper to her husband. The man at the bar who had been tracing the frame with his eyes finally turned toward his companion and said, "Did you ever see a place forget itself?" I could tell by his mouth that he didn't expect an answer. People say cruel things when they are tired of waiting for grace. My son snapped his fingers again and told the waiter to bring champagne. "We're celebrating," he said, "my first week running the place solo." He looked at me with a smile he wanted to read as good-natured. "Retirement suits you." I breathed once, twice. "If I had retired," I said, "you would know." His eyes flicked, a quick flinch he smoothed into a smirk. "You signed off," he said. "You said I could make decisions. That's what running it is." I nodded as if the difference were small. "Decisions are not ownership," I said. He laughed. "There he goes," he told his friends. Semantics again. Kareem returned not with champagne, but with a simple bottle of water and an extra glass. He placed them on a side station and wiped his hands on a clean towel, slow, exact. Then he walked to the wall. He stood in front of the frame and pretended to check a nail. To most eyes, it looked like work. To mine, it looked like respect, asking for permission. He glanced my way. I set my cup down. The porcelain gave a soft click against the saucer, a little sound that can be louder than shouting if you make the room want to hear it. My son noticed the movement and rolled his eyes again. "Kareem," he called, "after you're done pretending to decorate, bring the bottle. The table is thirsty." The word pretending sat in the air like a fly. "Leave the frame," I said, not loud, just even. The words were for Kareem, but the weight of them was for my son. Kareem nodded once, almost nothing, and kept his hand on the bottom edge of the frame like a man who knows where the hinge is that no one else sees. My son snorted. "What is this?" he asked. "You two with your museum games?" His friend with the watch snickered and nudged him. "Old men like old frames," he said, loud enough for Kareem to hear. "Let them have their toy. We have real money to talk about." I thought then about my wife's hands again. Not the hospital hands, the kitchen hands. How she would rest her palm on the corner of a plate before carrying it, as if asking the food to behave. How she would adjust a picture on the wall by the smallest degree, and then step back and smile because the difference would feel like a secret only she and the wall shared. She used to tell me, "Be gentle with the things that hold our story." And I would answer, "I'm not gentle. I'm careful." Tonight, carefulness felt like a blade I had sharpened over years without knowing exactly when I would need it. The champagne arrived, and the pop was too loud for the size of the room. Heads turned in irritation that wanted a reason to be offended. My son poured for his friends first, then filled his own glass, then left the bottle pointed toward me, like a joke with a shaped punchline. "Toast," he said, "to the future." His friends lifted their glasses and banged the rims against each other. I did not lift mine. "To memory," I said instead. He laughed. "Memory doesn't pay rent." I looked at Kareem. He tilted his head just enough for one person to notice. "Before you make your next speech," I said to my son, "answer a question." He sighed like a teacher bored by a slow student. "Fine, make it fast." I nodded toward the frame. "Who wrote that name?" He didn't look. "You," he said. "We know the story." "And who hung it?" "You and Mom," he said, impatient now. "And who told you to leave it there when you were 10 and tried to pry it off to buy candy?" His friends laughed. "Is that true?" one asked. He shrugged and smiled, remembering too late that he had lived here before he wanted to be seen. "I was a kid," he said. "I liked candy." I nodded. "And we taught you something that day." He rolled his eyes. "Respect," he said, flat. "Can we move on?" We could, but I didn't. "Respect looks like a frame on a wall," I said, "and it looks like how you speak to men who carry plates so your mouth can say big words. It looks like what you do with your father when you think the room will clap for you if you make him small." His cheeks colored, quick and hot. He glanced at his friends. "He's making a scene," the watch boy said, but softly now. He could feel the room leaning toward me, not away. Respect has gravity. You can ignore it for a while, then your feet remember it. My son tried to smile through it. "Dad, don't ruin a good evening." "I'm not," I said. "I'm choosing when it begins." He frowned. "It began when I took charge." I shook my head. "It begins when the room remembers." He scoffed. "And how does a room remember?" I looked at Kareem. He lifted the frame carefully, thumbs firm on the wood, not on the glass. The way a man holds something that has outlived more than one owner. He didn't take it down. He brought it forward an inch, then another, and everyone who cared saw the line of dust that proved it had been there a very long time. He didn't look at my son. He looked at me. "Be certain," he said. And even though the words were quiet, they were not small. My son laughed, but the sound frayed at the edges. "What is this?" he asked. "A ritual?" I took a breath that reached all the way back to a Tuesday with a blue scarf and a cheap frame. "It is," I said. "The only kind that matters in a place like this." My son opened his mouth to cut me again, but his friend touched his elbow, a light warning. The bar had gone quiet without meaning to. The couple at table 5 had stopped pretending not to listen. The busboy took one unnecessary step back into the kitchen, as if he knew that sometimes you give important moments a little more space. I placed 2 fingers on the table and felt the grain, the tiny grooves where knives had left their stories. "In a moment," I said, "you will see why some things stay on walls." He rolled his eyes and looked toward the entrance where he expected his investors to appear like a rescue. None did. He made his voice bright again and turned to the room. "Sorry for the delay, folks," he called, showman smooth. "Just a small family." He searched for the word and failed. Family what? Argument, memory, audit? He let the sentence die. Kareem waited. The frame waited. The room waited. And I waited too, but not the way a weak man waits. I waited like a man who has measured his steps and knows the exact distance between the first nail and the last. I could feel my wife's steady hand on the moment, the way she would press her thumb to a loose corner of our life and say, "Hold here." So I held. I let my son's laugh try one more time, smaller now, a copy of itself. I let his friends look everywhere and nowhere. I let the waiter take one slow breath and the busboy another. Then I nodded once to Kareem, a nod small enough to miss if you weren't looking for it. He took the frame into his hands, turned, and began to carry it away from the wall. Kareem held the frame like something living and walked it across the room. The chatter thinned on its own, like people were turning down their own volume knobs without being told. He did not rush. When he reached our table, he set the frame on the empty chair beside me and wiped his hands once on his towel. The glass was smudged by years of air and light. The wood had a small dent where a careless elbow once landed, and I sanded it back to smooth. Kareem glanced at me, asking with his eyes if he should continue. I nodded. He slid a fingernail under the metal tabs and lifted the back with the care of a man opening a letter from someone who has passed. My son tried to make it a joke. "What is this, show and tell?" he said, smiling at his friends. "Okay, Grandpa, give us the history lesson." The laugh was ready in his mouth like a rehearsed line. It didn't get out. Because when Kareem eased the bill and the cardboard backing free and turned it, the receipt strip we had taped there all those years ago came into the light. The ink had faded to a soft brown, but the letters were clear. My name, my full name, written by my own hand, steady because her hand had steadied mine. The date. And below, her small line in blue pen, a witness line. First dollar paid, first promise kept. No one spoke for a beat. You know that particular kind of quiet when a truth walks in and sits down at the table like it also paid for a seat? That quiet. The laughter that had been ballooning all night lost air and went thin. My son leaned in without meaning to. He squinted. His forehead made a small crease he normally hides with confidence. "So?" he said, but softer. We knew that. He looked around for agreement and found eyes that were not ready to agree with him anymore. People were not looking at him now. They were looking at the paper that knew our names better than a keyboard ever could. Kareem didn't look at my son. He held the bill with both hands so it would not bend. His voice was even. "Sir," he said to me, and the room heard the "sir," "do you want to keep this by you?" He did not ask my son. He did not ask the table. He asked me as a man asks the owner of a thing whether the thing might rest closer to its maker. I felt my throat climb and settle. I nodded once. "For now," I said. "Let it breathe." He set the bill on the white cloth near my right hand. The green looked deeper away from the wall. The receipt strip clung to the back like a story that refuses to be peeled off. My son tried to get his balance back. "Cute," he said, but the word had less muscle. "A museum piece. It doesn't mean anything about now." His friend with the big watch leaned over the frame and read the line out loud because he needed the room to hear his reading voice. First dollar paid, first promise kept. That's poetic. He meant it as mockery, but the last word came out unsure, like someone tasting a spice he didn't know he liked. The waiter, who had been still as a painting, exhaled and took a half step closer to our table. The busboy stood with a stack of plates that would have been heavy any other night. Now he carried them like proof. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I traced the edge of the receipt strip with a fingertip, the way you test a scar to see if it still remembers pain. That day, I said, we opened the door not because we had enough money, but because we had enough nerve. I looked at the bill, not at my boy. A man came in from the cold, took off his cap, and paid for a bowl we would have given him for nothing. He said he didn't want to owe us. We said we would owe him instead, by remembering. I tapped the paper gently. This is the memory. It belongs to the wall because the wall was there. It belongs to me because that hand was mine. And it belongs to your mother because the line in blue is hers. The word mother put a small crack in the surface of his face. He hid it fast, but I saw it. He lifted his chin, defensive. We're not talking about the past, he said. We're talking about what looks good now. Investors don't care about faded paper. He plucked at his shirt cuff like he could pull a different answer out of the thread. They care about the brand. Kareem set the frame's empty wooden shell down and folded the backing board, waiting for where the truth would be placed next. At the bar, a man I have served for years nodded to himself, a small nod like you give when a sum checks out. Brand, I said, still calm. Brand is the promise people believe. This, I touched the strip, is the first time we said it and kept it. The couple at table 5 were leaned in now, hands around their glasses, listening like the radio had switched to a familiar station. My son breathed through his nose, a short, impatient breath. Enough, he said. Kareem, put it back and we'll remove it later. We're not doing this right now. Kareem did not move. He looked at me. I gave him the smallest shake of my head. It takes years to build this kind of language between two men who respect the same room. Why are you making this dramatic? My son asked, trying for a chuckle that didn't show up. It's $1. Do you think it makes you king? Fine, you wrote your name on it. Great, we're done. His friends nodded too quickly, eager to help him carry his certainty. The watchboy coughed, awkward. The waiter took a pad from his apron pocket and surprised himself by saying, Sir, your mother used to make me write the day's specials twice. Once for the board, once in the book. He swallowed, then went on. She'd read the book back every Sunday. She said the book is where the kitchen remembers what it promised. It wasn't a speech. It was a truth that had been waiting all night for a hole in the noise. My son looked at the waiter like a man looks at a door he always thought would open for him and finds it locked for the first time. Thanks, he said, the word brittle. You can go. The waiter didn't move. I'll wait, he said, low, to Kareem, not to my son. Something in the air changed temperature. You could feel it. The room had switched sides without getting up. Kareem lifted the bill again, turned it back to show the front, and held it so the light washed across the face. Do you want to see the other writing? He asked quietly, but the quiet traveled. My son frowned. What other writing? Kareem nodded to the lower right corner, where the edge of the bill overlapped the receipt strip. On the day we framed it, he said, and I heard him climb into the memory without asking my permission. She asked you, he looked at me, if you wanted to add anything else, and you said no. Then she took the pen from your fingers and added something anyway. He tilted the bill. The blue letters showed when the glass glare moved away. I didn't need to read it. I could see it without seeing. I had watched her add it that day, laughing when I said we were being dramatic. 4 small words, all in her stubborn neatness. For him, one day. My son blinked, his mouth opened before his words had a chance to line up. What is that? He asked, though he knew. He always knew when she meant him. She had a way of talking to him, even when she was speaking to me. We both watched the blue words sit there like a future she had saved and pinned, where time could not erase it. For him one day. She meant a lesson, I said, and my voice softened because her handwriting always does that to me. Not a gift. Lessons are heavier. I met his eyes then, because this part was for only us. She wanted you to grow into the kind of man who can leave old things up, because he understands what new things stand on. He looked down fast, then up fast, trying to outrun the heat behind his eyes. He found his friends' faces and reached for their comfort like a man reaches for a railing when the floor moves. They could not give it. Their smiles had slipped, and in their place there was the careful look of people who don't want to be seen next to a mistake. He stiffened. Anger is a coat boys throw on when shame chills them. "So what?" he said, louder than he meant. "So she wrote a note. So you wrote your name. This is all theater." He pointed his fork at the bill as if it were a person he could scold. "It doesn't prove anything about who runs this place now." He pushed back his chair half an inch, made it scrape. He wanted sound on his side again. The scrape did not scare anyone. It just made the wood remember where it was. I let silence do some of the work, then said, "You're right." He brightened at the easy. Win he thought he'd heard. "It doesn't prove everything," I continued. "It proves only what it proves." I tapped the strip again. "It proves who promised first. It proves who kept a thing safe when there was nothing else to hold it. It proves your mother's line about one day. And it proves that even when you forget, paper does not." I looked at Kareem. "Hold it up," I said. He did. People at the bar leaned, not rudely, just enough to see. A woman near the door covered her mouth in that small, surprised way people do when shame arrives late and still feels on time. My son stood up then, fast, as if standing would give him height back. "Enough," he said. "We are done with the nostalgia." He looked at Kareem and spoke in the voice he uses on staff he thinks are below him. "Put it back and prepare the bill. We have an investor meeting in 15 and I won't be late because of a prop." Kareem did what good men do when they are being tested by boys. He didn't argue. He didn't obey. He asked the room instead. "Do you remember?" he said to no one and everyone. "The day the inspector came on a Friday and tried to shut us for the weekend." Heads nodded around the space, little ripples. "Do you remember who stood at the door and said, 'Come back Monday and eat first'?" More nods. A small applause from the bar that stopped itself, embarrassed by coming early. My son stared at the applause like it had betrayed him. "What does that have to do with anything?" he asked. I answered without looking away from the blue ink. "It has to do with the kind of power that doesn't need to be announced," I said. "The kind that is written in quiet places and hung up where light can find it." I slid my chair back. I stood, not fast. I am not a young man, but there is a way to stand that says the floor is yours without saying a word. The floor felt it. Even the ice in the water glass settled. He took one step toward me, then stopped, the fork still in his hand like a small metal flag. "You can't embarrass me in my own place," he said. The phrase, "my own place," was too big for him. It didn't fit his mouth. I did not smile this time. "You are embarrassing yourself," I said quietly, "and you are using my place to do it." His cheeks reddened again, higher this time. "Your place?" he repeated, scoffing, reaching for another laugh that didn't come. "You said—" He stopped. He remembered he had only ever repeated what I allowed him to repeat. He remembered that responsibility is not the same as control, and neither is the same as ownership. The room could see him remembering. It is a hard thing to do under lights. Kareem breathed, a sound I have known through winters and summers. He set the frame's wood on the table, took the bill and the backing board in one hand, and bowed his head slightly toward me. "With your permission," he said, "I will keep this near you until you finish your coffee." It was not a question that needed an answer. He placed the bill beside my cup. The green edge touched the white saucer. It looked right there, like a ledger balanced. I turned to my son the way I used to look down at him when he was 5 and would not let go of a toy that was not his. "Sit," I said, not harsh. "Finish what you started." He swallowed and did not sit. "Finish what?" he asked, low, defensive. "Your meal," I said. "Your performance. Your claim I let each word arrive alone, slow enough to be counted. Finish telling your friends how old promises don't matter. Finish telling Kareem to take down the past. Finish telling a room that knows your mother's handwriting, that her words are bad for business." I paused. "Finish or stop, but choose. Because this part," I tapped the bill, "this part is done pretending it's invisible." He put the fork down. The metal made a clean little note on the plate. He sat. The chair made no sound this time. His friends sank with him, the way trees bend when the wind changes, and they realize it's coming from the direction that knows their names. He looked at his hands. He looked at the bill. He made himself laugh once, a dry cough of a laugh. "Fine," he said, voice hoarse at the edges. "Keep your dollar. We'll design around it." It was an attempt at surrender that felt like a retreat drawn on a napkin. "That's not the point," I said, but I didn't push. Not yet. Pushing too early is how you break good wood. I sat too. I lifted the coffee and drank. It had cooled, but it still did the work it was meant to do. I let the room start breathing again. People turned back to their plates, but more slowly now, like they wanted to make sure their forks didn't clatter over the ending. Kareem slid the frame back under the bill and the board, like a tailor laying cloth under something old that needs to be fitted again. He did not reassemble it. He let it be in pieces on the table, where it could be seen. I spoke to my son without looking at him. "There is more you need to see," I said, "but not all at once. You choke on truth when you swallow it too fast." He wiped his mouth with a napkin he didn't need. "I don't need to see anything," he said, but it didn't have force. "I see enough." I nodded, because sometimes you let a man keep one small untrue sentence so he doesn't feel completely undressed. "Then eat," I said. "You said we were wasting time." He cut his steak and chewed, as if chewing were a task he could finish and be done with everything else. The busboy moved again, finally. He took plates from the next table and stacked them with a soft copper rhythm. The waiter scribbled a note to himself in the small book I know he keeps, and slipped it back into his apron, with a pride that was not about his job title. At the bar, the man who had nodded earlier said to his companion, "You don't move a Z lighthouse because a boat wants a different view." His companion laughed quietly into his drink and said, "You tell him." My son's friends glanced at their phones. The watchboy typed something and then put the phone face down like guilt. One of them cleared his throat. "Hey man," he said to my son, trying for cheer. "We should head out soon, right? For the meeting?" My son cut another piece of meat. He swallowed. He nodded without energy. "Yeah," he said. "Soon." He dabbed at his lips again. He glanced at me, then away. He looked at the bill and then back at his plate. The blue words were a small fire near his hands. He could not ignore the heat. I leaned back so the chair found my shape and held it. "When you were 10, I said, you tried to take this down." He exhaled a small laugh, surprise and memory mixed. "For candy?" he said. "Yes," I said. "You cried in the pantry when I told you no. You thought we were cruel." He nodded, eyes down. "I also remember," I went on, "that you put your hand on the glass later that night, when you believed no one could see you. You said sorry to it." His head lifted, quick. He searched my face. "How do you know?" he asked, like a boy again. "Because I was sweeping," I said. "Because this room tells me everything if I listen." He looked like he wanted to ask me something else and then decided not to. He nodded instead, small, tired. The anger coat had slipped off his shoulders and was pooling at his elbows. "Eat," I said once more, gently. He did. The meat went down easier this time. The room's temperature settled. Kareem gathered his towel and rested it over his arm like a flag at ease. He did not put the bill back on the wall. He left it where it was, near my hand, where it could keep doing its job. You might think that was the end of the scene, that the dollar did all the talking needed. It did enough for now, but a story like this doesn't stop at proof. Proof is the front door. Justice is further inside. I let him finish his plate in peace because the next part should not be done over half-chewed food and pride stuck in a throat. I let the coffee cool all the way and drank it anyway. I let the sound return to its proper size. I let the room think it had gone back to normal, even as everyone knew it had not. When he finally pushed his plate away, he did it gently. He folded his napkin slowly and set it down with a care that wasn't in him at the beginning of the night. He looked at the bill again. He didn't try to touch it. He looked at me, and in that look, there was a question he didn't want to make into words. I answered without him asking. "After dessert," I said, "we will talk about papers." "Not stories, papers." He swallowed. He nodded. His friends got suddenly interested in the salt shaker, the ceiling, their shoes. The waiter brought a small plate with 2 slices of cake, the kind my wife invented to use extra cream. On slow days, he set it between us like a treaty. My son picked up his fork and took one bite. He closed his eyes around the sweetness like a memory had surprised him from the inside. When he opened them, he didn't look younger or older. He looked like a person whose map had one new road drawn on it. He breathed in and out. "Okay," he said. Quiet. After dessert. Kareem heard it. The room heard it. The little blue letters on the back of the bill seemed to sit brighter in the light. I rested my finger on the edge of the frame's wood, not on the glass. I felt the old dent. I felt the smoothness I had sanded back then. In my head, I saw her thumb smoothing the air, telling me without words, "Hold here." I held. The night finally held with me. The cake sat between us like a truce line, the smell of vanilla and cream rising in little waves. My son took another slow bite, eyes on the plate, and I let him finish without a word. When his fork clicked down, I pushed the frame's wood gently aside, left the bill and the blue handwriting in the open, and wiped my fingers on the napkin, the way I have 1,000 nights after finishing something sweet. "Now," I said, not loud. Kareem heard me from across the room and came over with the careful stride of a man who knows the next step matters. He stood by my chair, towel folded over his wrist, waiting. I didn't stand. I didn't clear my throat. I only placed my palm on the table and said, "Bring the ledger from the office, and the blue folder from the safe." He nodded once and left without asking which key. He knows the keys by their temperature. The air changed again, the way it does right before a storm decides whether it wants to be a storm or a story to tell later. My son leaned back, tried to look bored. "Dad, this is unnecessary. We're not..." He stopped when he caught the faces at the nearby tables. People were watching, yes, but not with hunger for a show. With a quiet hope something true would be said that could be kept. The waiter stood a little straighter. The busboy set down his stack and rubbed the dent in his palm where plates had been. At the bar, someone put a note of cash under his empty glass and didn't ask for change, a small vote for the house. Kareem returned with the old black ledger I keep, because paper listens differently than screens, and with the blue folder I had not opened in years without first saying her name in my head. He held them as if they could bite. He set the ledger by the coffee and the folder in front of me, then stepped back. The blue had faded to that sea color that happens to brave cloth left near sun and work. I rested 2 fingers on it. My son gave a short laugh, thin as a thread. "Props now," he said, looking to his friends for their safety. Their smiles were the flimsy kind people wear when they're waiting to see where the floor is. "This," I said, tapping the ledger, "is where we wrote the names of everyone who joined this place and the promises we made to them." I opened it to the first page. The paper smelled like starch and old mornings. The first 2 lines were mine and hers, written on a day when our hands were cleaner than our hearts were tired. Below, lines and lines of names, some crossed out gently when life took people elsewhere. Some circled on days they came back. I turned the pages, slow enough for the room to hear the hush of paper on air. When I reached a certain page, I stopped. "Here," I said, and turned the book to my son. 10 years old, tried to take the dollar down, learned the word boundary. He read his name where I had printed it with a father's sternness, softened by pride. He remembered and hated that he did. Across the room, a couple started a little clap, without intending to, and then stopped, embarrassed by their hands. I closed the ledger. "You talk about brand," I said. "Brand is a ledger you make people believe in. We wrote ours by working, not by filming ourselves working." He rolled his eyes, stubborn out of habit more than conviction now. I opened the blue folder. The brass paper fastener clicked as I twisted it. The top document was the city approval for our remodeling, the one stamped on a Monday morning after a Friday night soup that convinced a man that rules and mercy can live in one room. I set it aside. The next was the lease to the building, original, signed by a landlord who has since died. Addendum on top with the parcel purchase when we stopped renting and started carrying the land. I slid it 1/2 inch toward the light so the seal caught everybody's attention. The next was a letter from the bank. "This is to confirm," it began and it ended, held in the name of my full name and her full name, joint tenancy with right of survivorship. My son's jaw tightened. He kept his face in order, but you could see him doing it. "This isn't a courtroom," he said, but the words had the shape of fear. "We don't need..." I put a fingertip on the line with our names and shook my head once. "We do," I said. "We need exactly this much truth to fit the room." I lifted the next paper. It was the operating agreement we drafted when the staff grew and the kitchen split into stations and life needed more than nods and memory to keep its shape. I read one clause out loud, not for drama, for comprehension. Managerial authority may be delegated by owner in writing and revoked by owner at will, without cause. The signature line held my name twice. The second time in that long, patient arc, I learned the day the notary said, "Sign as you intend to live." Below, a smaller signature, his from last year, when I gave him the manager title he wanted because I needed him to stand where a man stands and see the view. I turned the page and slid out the letter clipped inside, dated 3 months ago, addressed to the accountant, the suppliers, the payroll company. "This letter," I said, "is the delegation. It has a companion." I tapped the stack. "This one," and I lifted the next page, "is the revocation, prepared the same day. Dated blank." He stared at it like a mirror that would not lie for him. "Why would you—" he started. He didn't finish. He knew why. "Because I have learned to hold softness in one hand and structure in the other, and because love without a spine is just wishing." I signed the revocation with my slow, neat hand. The sound of pen on paper is small but absolute. I did not flourish. I wrote my name like I mean it. Kareem brought the small stamp we keep for deliveries. Notary's mark already imprinted months ago, when I had the forethought to visit her office and tell her I might need to attach it later. He set the stamp's clear cover aside and pushed it toward me, the way you pass a sharp knife to a man who cuts straight. I pressed it where it belonged. The room didn't clap. It breathed out, a shared exhale. My son found his laugh and lost it in the same breath. It was a sound with no place to land. His friends shifted in their seats. The watchboy picked up his phone, then put it back down without unlocking it, as if waking the screen might wake a worse version of the night. One reached for his jacket hanging on the back of the chair. "We should, he said to no one. My son flicked his eyes at them, panicked small, and tried to build a smile out of stubbornness. "Guys, relax," he said. "It's just paperwork theater. He loves this stuff." His voice was wobble, pretending to be music. "It isn't theater," I said, still quiet. I slid the signed revocation into a clear sleeve and handed it to Kareem. "Scan and send to the accountant, suppliers, payroll, and bank right after close," I said. "Mark it urgent. Subject line, update, signatory authority." He nodded, the nod of a man used to instructions that keep a house upright. My son reached for the paper as if he could take it back by touching it. Kareem shifted an inch, and the paper was no longer where his hand expected. You could see the moment he understood that the air had changed teams. The door opened then. 2 men and a woman walked in, coats open, eyes alert. They were on time for a meeting my son had invited them to. The woman checked the room with one well-trained glance and found us. She smiled her investor's smile, the one you practice in mirrors to look like you don't mind the smell of kitchens. "We must be early," she said, checking her watch. "Or right on time." My son pushed his chair back halfway, then stopped, unsure whether to stand in welcome or stay small in the seat the truth had just tailored for him. I stood, not to greet them, to set the terms. "Welcome," I said. Simple. She tilted her head, recalculating. "You must be," she began, "the man whose name is on the lease, the deed, the bank accounts, the fire inspection log, and the first dollar," I said, the last without a smile. "Please, have a drink at the bar on the house while we finish a family matter." She looked past me at the bill on the table and then at my son's face and understood faster than most would. She nodded, not insulted, relieved even. Investors like clarity. "Of course," she said, and stepped aside with a grace built from not needing to force a door. My son's mouth tightened. "You just cost me," he began. I raised a hand and the sentence ran out of room. "I saved you," I said, and gestured toward the bar, where their laughter floated on a level nobody resented. "You do not bring strangers into a room that hasn't finished telling the truth to itself." He swallowed that, and it lodged somewhere behind his pride. He looked at the revocation sleeve in Kareem's hand, like a man who sees the tide commit to leaving. "So, that's it?" he said. "You humiliate me in front of everyone?" His voice cracked at the edge and quickly tried to pretend it hadn't. "I didn't humiliate you," I said. "You did. I simply turned the lights on." I took the company card from the blue folder, another thing he had not imagined I still held, and set it next to his empty glass. "Leave that," I said. "It's tied to accounts you no longer command." I held out my palm. "Keys." He blinked. "I don't carry keys," he said, defensive reflex. "It's all codes." I nodded as if making a note in my head. Then the codes change at close, I said to Kareem. All of them. Office, storage, safe, backdoor, POS, Wi-Fi admin. Have the new list printed. Only you, me, and the night supervisor hold it. Kareem's "yes sir" was steady, not sharp. Around us the room was doing something I have only seen a few times in my life. It was learning and agreeing at the same time. People turned back to their meals, yes, but they kept one ear open, honoring the idea that some nights don't belong to just the people at one table. My son's friends stood up, then sat down again when they realized standing would make them look bigger than their courage. One cleared his throat. "We should give you guys privacy," he said. It sounded like he was asking permission to leave a debt unpaid. I nodded at them without heat. "You're guests," I said. "Eat, then go. No hard feelings." They took the mercy and we'll tell the story later in a way that makes them sound wiser than they were. That is also a kind of survival. Now for the cold edge of it, the part my wife would call the stitch that keeps the whole seam honest. I opened the final flap in the blue folder and took out a smaller envelope, sealed with her handwriting on the front, my son's name. I let him see it. He flinched, so small I almost missed it. I had not planned to use this tonight. I had hoped I wouldn't need to until his hands were cleaner, but sometimes the night chooses. I broke the seal with a thumb and slid out one page. Her writing was neat, each letter standing on its feet. I didn't read it to the room. Some things you do not put on the loudspeaker. I handed it to him. "From her," I said, and looked away to give him a bit of cover while the words did their work. He read. His lips moved barely. I saw the moment his eyes hit the line that always snags the throat. I know because it snags mine every time I have let myself read it. "You may inherit the doors, but not before you learn how to be the door." He folded the paper, then unfolded it again, like the crease would make the meaning smaller. His friends stared at the table, as if it could teach them how to disappear. Kareem stood still with that particular kindness of not looking at a man while he fights himself. When his breathing found itself again, he set the letter down next to the dollar, her blue meeting her blue across years. He didn't speak. The room could feel the silence wasn't empty. It was full of a woman's voice. I turned to the practical, because practical is how you build a bridge out of feeling. "Here is what happens," I said, looking at him only. "Effective now, you are suspended from managerial duties for 30 days, not as punishment, as apprenticeship. In those 30 days you will work the floor, the dish pit, the prep station, and the morning deliveries. You will come early and leave late. You will clean the grease trap while Kareem watches so you don't cut your hands. You will learn every name on the ledger and the promise next to it. At the end of 30 days, if you want this to be your future still, we will talk about authority again. If you don't, you will have at least learned to close a kitchen with dignity." He stared at me like I had said the sky would fall up. "You're demoting me," he said. "I'm teaching you," I answered. "Teaching looks like demotion when pride is listening." He shook his head, the last stand of a boy who isn't sure whether he wants to be a man yet. "I won't," he said, but even he could hear the flimsy in it. I shrugged one shoulder. "Then you won't be here," I said. "You may leave now, take your friends, start your own place if you'd like. I will not stop you, I will not fund you, and I will not attend your opening. Choose." The choice sat on the table like a tool. He could pick it up and use it or keep telling stories to himself about why tools are unfair. He looked at the letter again. He looked at the dollar. He looked at the ledger closed under my hand. He looked at the people who knew his mother and would never buy a story that erased her. Finally, he looked at Kareem, not as a boss looks at staff, as a student looks at the person who knows where the light switches are when the house goes dark. "If I stay," he said, voice low, You'll show me?" Kareem's face did something small and good that I have only seen him do with the youngest line cooks when they get their first sauce right. "I will show you what I know," he said, "and I will correct you when you pretend to know what you don't." My son nodded once, like a man testing how much of himself he can keep and still change. 30 days, he said. 30 days, I agreed. No shortcuts. He gave a tiny, miserable laugh. "You removed my shortcuts." I let my mouth soften. "I removed your illusions," I said. "Shortcuts are still there. They just don't go where you think." He breathed in, breathed out. "Fine," he said. "I'll stay." He glanced at his friends, and to their credit or their instinct, they nodded as if to say it was the right call, or at least the only honest one left. Public humiliation didn't look like shouting or thrown plates. It looked like a young man putting his own keyless hands on the table in front of old paper, and seeing which one the room recognized as real. It looked like investors drinking at the bar and deciding they trusted the place more than they had when they walked in. It looked like a waiter's shoulders lowering half an inch, because respect had been returned to the air he was breathing. It looked like the busboy letting out a laugh he had been holding, because he understood now that he could learn here without learning contempt. Cold revenge, if you insist on calling it that, was not rage. It was the stamp, the signature, the revocation placed like a quiet stone in a river that had been trying to run the wrong way. It was the change of codes, the card left on the table, the 30 days declared not as a threat but as a structure. It was telling the investors to wait at the bar because the house was cleaning its own heart before offering it to outsiders. It was the dollar on the cloth looking, for the first time in years, like it had come down from the wall for a purpose and not an argument. I took the light blue microfiber cloth Kareem keeps for glass and, with a tenderness that surprised me, wiped the frame's glass while the bill still lay on the table. Little circles, like my wife used to make when she was trying not to cry. Then I set the frame upright and slid the bill back in, the receipt strip and the 4 small words exactly where they had always been. Kareem pressed the metal tabs down with his fingernail. The sound was like tiny doors closing. He lifted the frame in both hands and looked at me. I nodded. He carried it back to the wall and hung it on its nail, and when he stepped away, you could see the clean rectangle of paint around it, where time had not touched. He adjusted it 1 millimeter until it was true. My son watched it the way a man watches a lighthouse after he has nearly ignored it into wreckage. His laugh, the bright, careless one he had thrown at the first course, didn't come back. In its place was something quieter, trying to be born. "Tomorrow," I said, "you arrive at 6. Apron on, with Kareem. Deliveries first. Then inventory. Then prep. You will write the specials twice, board and book." He nodded once, the way a man nods to a road he has finally decided to take. He stood, not to make a show, to clear the table. He gathered his plate and his friends, carried them toward the dish pit like a person who had just discovered labor, and returned for the next stack. The room didn't cheer. It did something better. It returned to eating with a kind of peace that makes restaurants holy places again. At the bar, the investor woman raised her glass slightly toward me. Not a toast, just an acknowledgement. "We see the house." I inclined my head back. "We see you waiting." The busboy laughed at something the dishwasher said. The waiter wrote "2 vanilla cake" in his pocket notebook and underlined it. Kareem stood under the first dollar and, just for a second, let his fingers hover close to the glass as if to feel the heat of it. Then he went back to work. So did I. The next morning, the street was still dark when I unlocked the front door. Cold air and the smell of last night's lemons came out to meet me. I clicked on the kitchen lights one by one. Steel woke slowly. Counters blinked. Pots remembered their shine. At 5:50, I heard his steps, quick, a little eager, a little afraid. He pushed through the back, hair damp from a rush shower, apron in his hand instead of on his waist. 6, I said. He looked at the clock and nodded. He tied the apron without a word. Kareem joined us with the delivery clipboard and the particular half-smile he saves for mornings, when the work will sort people by their patience. The truck backed into the alley. Doors opened. Crates of tomatoes, flour sacks, herbs and wet paper, fish on ice that still smelled faintly of the wide water. I handed my son a pen. "Sign for what you touch," I said. "Touch only what you can carry." He carried. He signed. The pen looked heavy in his hand for the first time in his life. We moved like a small army that has learned each other's feet. Kareem checked counts without glancing up, pencil between his teeth. My son tried to keep up with his eyes and his back at the same time. He didn't talk much. He didn't need to. The fish slid onto trays, the flour stacked, the herbs shook off their dew. We lost time on a crate that came in wrong and gained it back on a knife he finally learned to sharpen without turning the edge into teeth. By 7:30, his arms had a new line to them, not bigger, just honest. He looked at the clock again, surprised the hands had moved without his permission. "Board," I said, pointing to the chalk near the door. book," I said, placing the small notebook in his palm. He looked at both like a student you've just told there will be an oral exam and a written one. "Same words in two places," I said. "Because customers read what's easy to see, and the kitchen trusts what doesn't get erased by a clumsy elbow." He nodded and wrote "lemon thyme," chicken on the board in letters that tried to be mine. In the book, under Friday, he wrote it again, smaller, careful. He stopped halfway through and glanced up at the frame on the wall. The dollar caught a stripe of light and gave it back. His eyes softened. He finished the line. The grease trap came next. Most men meet humility there. Kareem showed him the wrench, how to turn slow, how to hold a rag ready for the first sour breath. "Don't fight the smell," Kareem said. "Respect it, and it will pass." My son said nothing. He worked. He gagged once and kept his hands steady. When it was done, Kareem handed him soap, then lemon. "That's how the kitchen forgives you," he said, and a ghost of a smile touched his mouth. My son washed up to the elbows. The lemon cut the smell. Pride cut itself down a size and learned to wear better shoes. By 10, front of house set their tables with a rhythm that could have been music if music liked to come with napkins. The waiter, the same one who had been told the night before not to fill my glass, approached my son with a rolled apron and a question in his eyes. My son moved first. "About last night," he said, quiet, no show. "I spoke to you like you were furniture. I won't do that again." The waiter looked at him and then at his own shoes to give him a small place to be forgiven. "Okay," he said. "We move forward." They shook hands, brief, a contract made of palms and the agreement to remember it. Lunch brought a test I did not arrange. The door swung, and a man with a camera phone already in his hand walked in like he was late to his own audience. He took a table near the window, dropped his bag too hard, and filmed the menu as if the words owed him an apology. He called the waiter over with a snap and said, "Make it fast. I'm reviewing you." My son took a breath and moved toward him before Kareem could. "Welcome," he said. "What are you thinking?" The man didn't look up. "I'm thinking I don't want to wait," he said. "And I'm thinking you should bring me something I can post." My son stood there, a second too long, then held his ground. "We'll bring you our best," he said, "and we'll bring it the right way. Please speak to my staff with respect." The man sneered as if the word respect was too old to fit in his mouth. "You the manager?" he asked, camera sliding accidentally toward my son's face. My son opened his mouth, closed it, then said, "I'm learning." He looked at the waiter. "2 lemon thyme chicken," he said, "and the soup first." The soup always first. The waiter's eyes warmed. That is a currency more valuable than likes. He made mistakes that week. He burned a pan. He forgot to salt one batch of stock and had to stand there while Kareem made him taste the difference between arrogance and attention. He miscounted a register by 20. He wrote the specials on the board and then forgot the book, and we had a run of customers who ordered a thing the kitchen didn't know was promised. He took the blame in front of the customers, and at night, when the room was empty, he went to the wall and stood under the first dollar with his hands in his pockets as if warming them on a memory. On the 7th morning, he arrived before me. The lights were already up. The deliveries were stage by station, on the board, soup first, in the book. The same, underlined. I found a note on the ledger line where his name lived from years ago. He had written, in his own adult hand, a new promise next to it. Listen before leading. I didn't praise him, not out loud. Praise too early makes some men soft. I clapped him once on the shoulder. He straightened, which is better. The investor woman came back in the second week. She sat at the bar without announcing herself and watched service. She watched my son cut a line of limes, lift a tray the right way, tell a busboy to take a break, and then swap in without the table, noticing a change. She watched him bend to a child's height to ask about allergies, and then write something on the board with a small correction when Kareem cleared his throat. At the end of the hour, she slid onto a stool near me. "Not for sale," I said before she could ask. She smiled. "I wasn't going to ask," she said. "I was going to say we back houses that know their story. If you ever need a bridge, call." She set a card down. Nothing flashy, solid weight. "And for what it's worth," she added, "we liked the part where he said he's learning." I nodded. So did I. On the 15th day, my son burned his hand on a panhandle he thought was cool. He hissed and tried to hide it. Kareem caught his wrist, ran the burn underwater, held a cool cloth. You're not iron, he said. You're hands and bone. Treat yourself like the tool you need to keep. My son nodded, eyes behind his teeth, and went back to work with his other hand. That night he stayed an hour late to clean the back walk, where the oil spills make a slick trap for the kids who cut through on bikes. He came in the next morning with a small limp and didn't complain. He poured me a coffee without being told. I sipped it and didn't comment. He knew it was right. On the 23rd day, he saw a couple come in, holding hands too tight. You learn to read certain tensions. He seated them far from the bar noise. He brought bread without charge and water with lemon because bitterness needs a soft edge. He moved around them the way you move around a candle in a drafty room. When they left, the woman touched his sleeve. "Thank you," she said. He nodded and went to wipe a table. He looked at the board, then the book, and added nothing, which is sometimes the correct lesson. Every night he did the count with me: cash, card, tips, waste. He learned the numbers aren't just totals, they're stories. Why did waste jump? Because tomatoes came softer today. Why did tips dip on the patio? Because wind. Why did the wine cost more to pour? Because the bartender was generous when the man at stool 3 told him about his job ending. He learned to see that mercy and margin have to shake hands in the open, not nod in the dark. He learned to say no in a voice that wasn't a shout. He learned to say yes like a man, not a prince. On the 30th morning, he came in at 5:50. He tied his apron with clean hands. He checked the board, then the book, then the shelf where the ledger lives. He didn't open it. He just touched the spine like you touch a shoulder you trust. He looked at me. "I'm ready," he said. I let the words sit between us the way good bread sits on a plate, warm, enough on its own. "We'll see," I said. Ready isn't what you feel, it's what you do. He didn't argue. Dinner that night, I asked Kareem to seat a table by the window for 4. I invited the investor trio, not for money, for witness. I invited the man who paid the first dollar all those years ago. He still comes on Tuesdays with a newspaper he pretends to read. I invited the couple from table 5, who had clapped at the wrong time and then stopped. And I saved a chair at our own table for the one person who would not come, except in the way light comes to glass. I set her scarf over the empty chair, blue, still soft from the drawer. My son saw it and stopped. He didn't cry. He nodded once to the scarf, like you nod to a rule that kept you safe long before you understood it. He served the room that night. He poured water without looking at his own hands. He laughed, not the bright, hard laugh from before, but the kind that lets other people keep their dignity. When my plate came, he carried it himself. He set it down gently. He did not make a speech. He looked at me and said, "So, the room could hear if it wanted. He's not here for free food." He swallowed. "He's the reason any food is here." The waiter breathed in like he hadn't let himself breathe all day. The busboy grinned and hid it behind his forearm. Kareem watched the frame with the first dollar and adjusted it with his eyes by a degree that only I could see. We ate. We let the plates say what plates say when they are cooked by people who have chosen their pride carefully. The investor woman raised her glass once in my son's direction. He didn't see it. He was refilling table 3's water. Better that way. When dessert came, I took the small envelope with her handwriting out of my pocket, the second page I had never shown him, the one I had kept for when my hand could be steady giving it. I slid it across the table. He looked at the blue and understood before he opened it. He read. He smiled in that quiet way his mother used to, like light thinking about where to land. He folded it and put it in the ledger on the page with his name, without me asking. After close, the room was ours again. Chairs up, floor clean, lights. Dim to the kindness level. We stood under the first dollar, just the 3 of us. Me, my son, and Kareem. No speeches. Work had already spoken. "Manager," I said. He looked at me. "Earned," I added, and his face loosened into something young and old at once. "With conditions," I said, and he nodded before I had to list them, because he now understood there are always conditions, and they are not insults, they are rails. "Board and book," he said. "Hands and bone," he said. "Listen before leading," he said. I nodded. I handed him a small ring with 2 keys, the back door and the office. Not the safe, not yet. "You'll earn the others," I said. "When you can keep doors and be one." He closed his fist on the keys like they were a promise he was making to his own future, not a gift from mine. We turned to go, and he paused, He reached up, not to take the dollar down, but to straighten it by a breath. He stepped back, checked it, and left it alone. We locked the front together. The street took back its night sounds. Somewhere, a bus sighed. He walked a few steps, then turned. "Dad," he said, just that. It was enough. "Tomorrow," I said. "6." He grinned small. "Soup first," he said, and headed toward the corner where the light catches the street like a habit you can trust. At home, I put the scarf back in the drawer and sat with the silence that knows how to be kind. The house smelled faintly of lemons and paper. I thought about the first dollar, the ledger lines, the blue handwriting that crossed time to keep its word. I thought about laughter, how it can turn cruel, and then, if you let it, turn human again. I thought about what it means to build something a boy can inherit without hollowing him out. If you felt this, tell me where you're listening from. Tell me what part of the story held you. Was it the dollar, the ledger, the lemon, or the line that said soup first? If you've ever watched pride soften into respect, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Like, share, and comment with your city or your story. I'm here, and I'll be reading.